You know, when a man decides to leave, he prepares a speech. He rehearses it in the car, in the shower. He has his points ready. The reasons, the justifications, the gentle letdowns. But a woman who's been left. She doesn't have a speech. What she has is a lifetime of details. And in the end, those details, the ones he never noticed, those are what tell the real story. Good evening, my dears. Come on in and sit with me a while. I want to talk to you about a Tuesday. An ordinary Tuesday. And about a mug. A simple, chipped, ceramic mug. And how, when my husband of 32 years told me he was leaving me for his young assistant, I didn't say much at all. I simply packed his favorite mug. This isn't a story about screaming, or slashing suits, or dramatic revenge. Those things take energy, you see, energy he'd already drained from me long ago. This is a story about silence. About the deafening, powerful sound of a woman finally stopping. Stopping the explanations. Stopping the upkeep. Stopping the emotional labor for a man who'd already checked out. So make yourself a cup of tea. Get comfortable. And let me walk you through the 6 things that happened in the quiet, after the door closed behind him. Very well, my dear. Let's settle into this first point. Let's really understand the texture of that moment. Pull your chair a little closer. The light is better here. He stood there in the kitchen with his speech. He had practiced it, I am sure. In the car on the drive home. In the mirror that morning while shaving. A man does not drop a bomb without preparing the ground first. He thinks of the words. He chooses them like tools from a box. He aims for a clean cut. He told me about her. About Sarah. About the connection, the understanding, the youth and the passion. He used the word alive. He said she made him feel alive. And as he said it, his eyes were not on me. They were on the space just over my shoulder, as if he were reading the lines from a teleprompter someone had hung in the air behind me. The words were smooth and rehearsed. They had a certain rhythm, a certain predictable arc. There was the confession, the regret, the cruel hope for my understanding, the promise to be fair. It was a complete performance. A one-man show in my kitchen. And I, the only audience member, sat silently. But here is what he did not plan for. What no one plans for. The shocking sharp focus of the mundane. As his voice formed these world-ending sentences about the end of our life together, my mind did not follow him into the tragedy. It did not race to the past, to all our memories. It did not flash forward to a lonely future. It stuck like a burr to the present. To the trivial, the absolutely ordinary. The overhead light was too bright. I had meant to change the bulb to a softer wattage for years. The faucet had the tiniest drip, a little plink in the metal sink that kept time with his voice. There was a single coffee ground on the otherwise clean countertop, a dark speck on the white quartz. My left sock had a loose thread in the toe, and I could feel it with every small shift of my foot. The world did not narrow to his face, to his betraying mouth. It expanded. It became hyper-real. Every detail shouted. I looked at his hands. They were gripping his coffee mug. His knuckles were white. And I thought, he will drop that mug. He is holding it so tightly he will shatter it. And then what a mess that would be. Ceramic shards and cold coffee across the floor. I would have to get the broom and the dustpan. I would have to get on my knees. And the thought of that, cleaning up that particular mess on top of this one, felt like the heaviest thing in the world. So I watched his hands and I willed him not to drop it. That was my primary concern in that moment. Do not drop the mug, David. Do not make me clean that up too. He finished his speech. He took a breath. He waited. He expected my lines. The tears. The why. The how could you. He was braced for the storm. He was ready to be the calm, reasonable one in the face of my hysterics. To be the martyr to my rage. But my mind was a room where the main event had been cancelled and all the small forgotten acts were now on stage. The laundry. I had moved a load from the washer to the dryer just before he walked in. Was it still tumbling? I could not hear it. Had I set the timer? It would wrinkle. I hate wrinkled clothes. The grocery list. I had been writing it when he started. The pen was still there on the table. I had written oatmeal and dish soap. We needed both. Would he take the oatmeal? Did he even like oatmeal anymore? Did Sarah buy him a different kind? This is the shock. The soul does not meet catastrophe with a grand equal emotion. Not at first. It meets it with the petty. With the administrative, it focuses on the drip of the faucet because the alternative is to drown in the flood. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this happen to another woman in another kitchen in another life. That woman's husband was leaving. That woman's heart was breaking. But me, I was noting that the clock on the microwave was 1 minute fast. It had been 1 minute fast for 3 years. I kept meaning to fix it. He cleared his throat. The silence was stretching too long for him. It was not in the script. Helen, he said, say something. I looked at him then. Really looked. I saw the man I knew, but he was behind a pane of thick glass. I saw the new lines by his eyes, the ones I had watched form year by year. I saw the way his shirt collar was slightly frayed at the edge. I should have darned that. But I had not. And now I never would. That was a thought. A clear, simple thought. I will never darn his collar again. A tiny stitch of duty unraveled forever. I think I should check the laundry, I said. My voice did not sound like my voice. It was flat and practical. It was the voice of a woman discussing a grocery list. Which in a way I was. He blinked. He looked utterly confused. What? The laundry, I repeated. I moved it before we started talking. It will wrinkle. I pushed my chair back. The legs made a scraping sound on the tile. A normal kitchen sound. A Tuesday sound. I walked past him. I caught the scent of his cologne. The one I had bought him for Christmas. It was too sharp. I never liked it. But he did. I walked to the laundry room. I opened the dryer. The clothes were warm and dry. I began to take them out. I folded a towel. I matched a pair of socks. My hands did the work they had done 10,000 times. The rhythm was a comfort. Fold, smooth, stack. Fold, smooth, stack. He appeared in the doorway. He was holding his mug still. Helen, this is serious. We need to talk about this. We are talking, I said. I placed the folded towel on top of the basket. I am listening. You told me you were leaving. You were in love with Sarah. She is pregnant. You want a divorce. I understand. The words were so simple. They were just facts. Like the fact that the towel was blue. Or that the socks were black. They held no emotion for me yet. They were simply inventory. But, the house, the money, everything. We have to. This weekend, I said again, turning to face him. You can come back this weekend and we will discuss the practical things. I will have my lawyer call your lawyer. It will be cleaner that way. Right now I have things to do. Things to do. The ultimate armor of a woman. We always have things to do. The planet spins on the axis of our things to do. And in that moment my list was my anchor. It was the only thing holding me to the earth. Check the laundry. Finish the grocery list. Consider dinner. Water the fern in the living room. These were monumental tasks. They were my purpose. He just stared. The ground was shifting under him, not under me. He had pushed the button for the explosion and instead the walls had gotten very, very quiet. He did not know how to be in this quiet. He needed the noise to justify his action. My calm was a roadblock. I walked back into the kitchen. I picked up my pen. I looked at my list. What else did we need? We. There was no we. Not anymore. I scratched out oatmeal and dish soap. I wrote wine and ice cream. Then I paused and scratched those out too. No, that was a cliché. The heartbroken woman with the wine and ice cream. I would not be that. I wrote fresh basil and good olive oil. I would make a proper pasta for myself. Something he never liked because he said garlic was too strong. He was still standing there. He looked lost. He looked like a little boy who had run away from home and suddenly realized it was getting dark. He had expected to be chased. He had expected a scene. He had not expected to be permitted to leave. My acceptance was a door held open, not a door slammed shut. And it terrified him. I need to take some things, he said finally. For tonight. Of course, I said without looking up. The guest room is made up. You can take whatever you need from there. No, I mean, from our room. My clothes. My toiletries. I put the pen down. I met his gaze. The guest room has everything you need for a night or two, David. Towels. A new toothbrush is under the sink. The soap you like is in the shower. If you need clothes, you have suits in the closet here and casual clothes in the cedar chest at the foot of the guest bed. I have kept them there for years. Remember, he had forgotten. The cedar chest held his old sweaters, his college sweatshirts, things he never wore but I could not bring myself to donate. They had been there untouched for a decade. A museum of a younger man. Now they would serve a purpose. They would clothe the stranger he had become. Oh, he said. Right. This is when the first crack appeared in my detachment. Not a crack of sadness but of a surreal absurdity. This was our life. 32 years. And it was ending not with a bang but with a discussion about where his old sweatpants were stored. It was so ludicrous I almost smiled. But I did not. I kept my face still. A placid lake. He walked heavily upstairs. I heard him moving around in the guest room. I did not follow. I stayed at the table. I looked at my hands. I looked at the clock. I listened to the drip of the faucet. Plink, plink, plink. The shock of the mundane is a kind of grace. It is your mind's way of building a levee against the tsunami. It gives you small dry tasks to focus on while the emotional floodwaters gather far out at sea. You fold the laundry. You write the list. You notice the thread in your sock. You become an accountant of the insignificant because the significant is too vast to calculate. He came back down with a small bag. He looked at me. I am going then. All right, I said. Drive safely. He hesitated. Will you be? I will be fine, David. I have things to do. And I did. I had so many things to do. The most important of which was to sit in that quiet kitchen and let the truth seep in slowly, drop by drop, like that faucet. Not all at once. That would have killed me. But slowly, manageably. First the fact of the empty driveway. Then the fact of the silence. Then the fact of the single plate in the sink. The mundane is not the enemy of the profound. It is its container. Our deepest griefs are not lived in grand gestures. They are lived in the empty space on the other side of the bed. In the absence of a second toothbrush in the holder. In the leftover coffee grown cold in the hot because you made too much out of habit. The shock is that life, the daily mechanical life, insists on continuing. The sun will set. The night will come. You will get hungry. You will grow tired. Your body will demand routine even if your world has ended. And in following that routine, in submitting to the mundane, you are pulled forward. You are forced to live through it minute by minute, detail by detail. Until one day you realize the catastrophe has been integrated. It has become just another detail in the long list of your life. Not the headline anymore, just a footnote, a Tuesday, a chipped mug, a drip in the sink. The beginning of everything new. Of course, my dear. This is where the real work began. After the door closed and the sound of his car faded down the street. After the first wave of quiet settled not as peace but as a thick dust in the air. That is when I stood up from the kitchen table and I knew I could not sit there with the ghost of his speech still hanging between the cabinets. I had to move, but moving in grief is not like other moving. It is slow and deliberate. It is a kind of archaeology. I did not go to our bedroom. Not at first. I went to the hall closet. The one where we kept the luggage. Our matching set we bought for a trip to Italy we never took. The bags were still faintly dusty. I pulled out the largest one. A sturdy navy blue roller bag. It felt light and hollow as I pulled it down the hall. The wheels made a soft whirring sound on the hardwood, a sound that seemed too cheerful for its new purpose. I stood at the threshold of our room. Our room. For 32 years. The light was fading now, casting long blue shadows across the bed we shared. The bed where we had slept and talked and sometimes in the earlier years laughed until our sides ached. It was just a room. Just furniture. But it felt like a sacred tomb I was about to desecrate. I did not start with the sentimental things. That would have been a trap. I started with the practical. The uniform of the man he had become. I opened his closet. The scent of him, wool and cedar, and that cinnamon scent from the little bags I tucked between the sweaters washed over me. It was the smell of my life. I reached for the suits. They hung in a solemn row like soldiers awaiting orders. The charcoal gray one he wore for important meetings. The navy pinstripe he wore to our goddaughter's wedding. The black one he buried his father in. I took them down one by one. My arms grew heavy with the weight of good fabric. I did not throw them. I did not drape them over my arm. I treated them with a ceremonial care. I laid each one on the bed we shared. I smoothed the lapels. I brushed a piece of invisible lint from a shoulder. I unbuttoned the jacket. I folded it with a precision I learned from a salesman in a department store a lifetime ago. Jacket first sleeves folded back, then folded in half. Trousers crease to crease. It was a ritual. With each fold I was not thinking of him with her. I was thinking of the man who stood in front of a mirror and knotted his tie each morning. The man who would call from the hallway, "Helen, does this look all right?" The man whose shoulder I would sometimes adjust the cloth of his jacket under my palm. That man was gone. I was folding the skin he had shed. I carried the stack of suits down the hall to the guest room. I laid them in the empty closet there. They looked foreign in that space. They looked like what they were now. A visitor's clothes. I went back. The ties next. A riot of silk stripes and dull patterns. I lifted them from the tie rack. They felt cool and sleek like the skin of a snake. I remembered buying so many of them. For birthdays, for Father's Days. This blue one with little gold ships he wore when he was feeling confident. This somber maroon he wore to funerals. I looped them gently over my hand, making a soft silken rope. A rope that could not bind anything anymore. Back and forth I went. A solemn procession. One woman carrying the artifacts of a shared civilization to a new smaller museum. The shoes lined up on the floor of his closet, polished and waiting. I placed them in neat pairs in the guest room closet. The sound of them clicking on the floor was the only sound in the house. Then came the dresser. This was deeper archaeology. This was the dig into the private layers. Socks rolled into balls, underwear neatly stacked, belts coiled. I placed them all in the open suitcase on the bed. It was not yet full. It looked hungry. I opened the top drawer. The personal drawer. Here were the relics. The ticket stub from a baseball game in 1997. A broken watch fob. A handful of foreign coins from a long-ago business trip. A smooth stone from a beach in Maine. A birthday card I made for him when I was 35, a clumsy drawing of a cake. To the best husband. He had kept it. Why had he kept it? The question did not bring tears. It brought a piercing curiosity. Who was the man who kept this card? He was not the man who left today. They were two different people. The card belonged to a ghost. I left the relics. I closed the drawer. They were not for me to move. They were part of the soil of this room. Let him discover them or not when he came to excavate his own past. I moved to the bathroom. His side of the counter. The electric razor still with little specks of his gray stubble in the head. The expensive hair paste in a sleek black tub. The scent of his soap. The dental floss. I gathered them all. They were still warm from the morning's use. I placed them in a toiletry bag. The sound of the zipper was final. It was the sound of a body bag. I was zipping up the daily habits of a man. I carried the bag to the guest bathroom and set it neatly by the sink. I looked at it there. It looked lonely. The books from his nightstand. The biography of Churchill he had been reading for 6 months, always on the same page. A book on sailing he dreamed about. A spy novel with a cracked spine. I stacked them. Their weight was familiar. I had moved these same books from house to house, from nightstand to nightstand for decades. Now I carried them 20 feet down a hallway and it felt like a continental drift. With each trip our room began to change. It was not an emptying. It was a revealing. The space his things occupied became visible. A rectangle of darker carpet where his shoes had been. A dust-free square on the dresser where his valet tray had sat. The empty hook on the back of the door where his robe had hung. I was not creating emptiness. I was uncovering the shape of his absence. I was making a map of what was no longer there. The final item was the hardest. Not because of emotion but because of its sheer physical presence. His leather chair, the old wingback by the window where he would sit and read or stare out at the garden. It had molded to the shape of his body. The leather was worn smooth on the arms. I could not move it. It was too heavy, so I did the only thing I could. I turned it. I gripped its sturdy back and with great effort I pivoted it away from the window towards the wall. It was no longer his chair by his window. It was just a piece of furniture facing a blank wall. A chair waiting for no one. I stood in the center of the room breathing heavily. The sun had fully set now. The room was lit only by the lamp on my side of the bed. It looked different, unfamiliar. The balance was off. The room had always been a composition of two. His side and my side. Now it was just my side and a vacant lot. This was not packing. Packing as for a journey. This was a disassembling. I was not sending him on a trip. I was slowly carefully surgically removing the weave of his daily life from the fabric of mine. Thread by thread, not with a ripping sound but with a soft unspooling. And as I worked a strange thing happened. The grief did not come as a wave. It came as these tiny realizations attached to each object. This tie he wore when he got the promotion. We went out for champagne. That sweater he had on when we brought our puppy home, a little black ball of fur that chewed everything. These cufflinks his father gave him. He wore them on our anniversary dinner every year. But the memories were not accusations. They were simply facts. They were exhibits in the museum. Labeled and behind glass. I could look at them but I could not touch their meaning anymore. The meaning had left with the man. The most profound moment came when I was done. I had moved all the daily things. The immediate things. The room was still full of us, the art we chose together, the photographs, the curtains I made, but the him was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed on my side. I looked at the empty space where his nightstand was. I had not moved the nightstand itself. Just the things on it and in it. The furniture was still shared. The history was still in the walls. But the present tense of him was now down the hall in the guest room. And I realized this was the story of our marriage for years perhaps. I had been living with the furniture of us, with the history in the walls, while the present tense of him had already slowly quietly moved down the hall. Room by room, year by year, first his attention, then his laughter, then his confidences, then his dreams. They had all relocated to a guest room in his heart, a place I was not allowed to enter. Today I had just completed the physical move. I had just caught up to the emotional truth. The archaeology was complete. I had brushed away the topsoil of our daily life and found the bedrock below. And the bedrock was a simple, shocking truth. He had already left. A long, long time ago. I was just now moving the artifacts. I turned off the lamp and left the room. I did not look back. There was nothing to see there anymore. Just a room. Just some furniture. The dig was over. All that was left was to learn how to live in the empty space I had uncovered. My own space. It was terrifying, and for the very first time that day it felt like my own. The morning after is a country for which there is no map. You wake and for one blessed fraction of a second you are just a woman in a bed. The light is pale and new. The air is cool, and then it arrives. The memory. It does not arrive as a thought. It arrives as a physical sensation. A cold stone settling in the hollow of your chest. A weight. You breathe around it. You open your eyes and you are alone. The shock of the mundane had been my shield. The archaeology of his things had been my purposeful distraction. But this was the first morning of the rest of it. There was no task but to exist. To move from the bed to the day. The machinery of life demanded operation and I was the only mechanic left. I pushed back the covers on my side. The other side was perfectly smooth, untouched. I had not slept well but I had slept. The body betrays you that way. It insists on its own survival. I stood up. The floor was cold under my feet. I put on my robe. I walked to the window and looked out. The world outside was the same. The neighbor's dog was barking at a squirrel. A car rolled slowly down the street. The paper was on the driveway. An ordinary Wednesday. The universe was profoundly indifferent. I found a strange comfort in that. I walked downstairs. The house was silent but it was a different silence now. Last night's silence had been shocked and watchful. This morning's silence was spacious. It was a room waiting to be filled with new sounds. My sounds. I entered the kitchen. The scene of the crime. It looked innocent in the morning light. The counter was wiped clean. His mug was gone. I went to the cupboard. I did not reach for my usual blue, utilitarian mug. My hand hovered and then moved past it. It went to the very back of the top shelf. A place I had not touched in decades. My fingers found the smooth curve of fine porcelain. I pulled out a single teacup and saucer. It was from my grandmother's set. Bone china with a pattern of tiny hand-painted violets and a delicate gilt edge. It was fragile. It was beautiful. It was utterly impractical. David had hated it. He called it fussy. He said it was a dust collector. That it made him feel like he was in a museum. So for 32 years these cups had lived in the dark. A whole service for 12 wrapped in tissue paper waiting for a special occasion that never quite arrived. I unwrapped this one cup. The tissue paper whispered. I held it up to the light. It was so thin I could see the shadow of my fingers through it. The violets were a soft purple. I remembered my grandmother pouring tea from a silver pot into cups just like this. The graceful arc of her wrist. The quiet clink of porcelain. It was a memory of a different kind of womanhood. One of quiet grace and small beautiful things. I filled the kettle. I chose a tea bag not from the utilitarian box of black breakfast tea but a loose leaf tea I kept in a tin. Jasmine pearls. The scent when I opened the tin was heavenly. Floral and delicate. I put a small spoonful into a little infuser. The kettle whistled. I poured the water slowly over the pearls, watching them swirl and begin to unfurl. I carried the cup and saucer to the table. I did not take my usual seat. I took his. I sat where he had sat the day before when he delivered his speech. I looked out at the window from his perspective. The view was the same but it felt different. I was the watcher now. I lifted the cup. The warmth seeped into my hands. I took a sip. The tea was perfect, light and fragrant. It tasted like a memory I had misplaced. I had made no sound. No radio, no television, just the soft click of the cup on the saucer. The luxury of that silence was immense. It was not an empty silence. It was a chosen one. I was not waiting for his footstep on the stair. I was not listening for the groan of the coffee maker he would need. I was simply sitting, drinking tea from a cup I loved. The next decision felt even more radical. Breakfast. What did I want? Not what needed to be made for two. Not what was quick and easy before he rushed out the door. What did Helen want? The question was so simple it was revolutionary. I thought about it. I did not want eggs. I did not want toast. I wanted a peach. A single perfectly ripe peach. And maybe a slice of the good sourdough bread toasted with a little butter. I got up. I went to the fruit bowl. There was a peach. I took it. I ran it under the water. I dried it with a cloth. I sliced the sourdough. I put it in the toaster. I set a single plate on the table. My grandmother's china plate with the same violet pattern. I placed the peach on it. The toast popped. I buttered it. I sat back down. I ate slowly. I tasted every bite. The sweet juiciness of the peach. The tang of the bread, the salt of the butter. I was not reading a newspaper. I was not planning my day. I was just eating. The sun moved across the table. A beam of light caught the gilt edge of my cup and it sparkled. I watched the sparkle. When I was finished I washed the single plate, the single cup, the single knife. I dried them carefully and put them not in the back of the cupboard but on the shelf where I could see them. They would be my daily dishes now. The day stretched before me a blank canvas. I felt a flicker of panic. What does one do? Then I remembered. I do what I want. The concept was dizzying. I walked into the living room. I looked at the furniture. It was arranged for conversation for a couple. For entertaining his colleagues. The sofa faced the television. 2 armchairs flanked the fireplace. It was a pleasant impersonal room. A room for a life we were supposed to be living. I did not want to sit in that room. I went to the small sunroom off the kitchen. The room we called the garden room. It was crowded with a messy desk, piles of old magazines, a treadmill draped with clothes. It was a dumping ground. The windows were dirty, but the light was beautiful. Morning light streamed in and made patterns on the tile floor. I wanted to sit in that light. So I began. Not a grand project. Just a clearing. I moved the treadmill to the garage. I sorted the magazines into recycling. I filed the papers from the desk. I found an old wicker chair in the basement. I dragged it upstairs and wiped it down. I placed it in the patch of sunlight. I found a small side table. I cleaned the windows until they shone. By noon I had a new room. My room. A room with 1 chair. A table. A clean window. And light. I made myself lunch. A simple salad. I ate it in my new chair in the sunlight. I read a book. Not a book I should read. Not a book for my book club. A book of poetry I had bought years ago and never opened. The poems were about the sea. They were sad and beautiful. I read them slowly. Sometimes I read a line twice. There was no one to ask me what I was doing. No one to interrupt. In the afternoon I felt tired. The emotional labor of the last 24 hours was a weight in my bones. I considered the sofa in the living room. But I did not want to be in that room. So I did something I had not done in maybe 20 years. I went upstairs in the middle of the day and I took a nap. I lay on my side of the bed in the quiet room. I slept deeply for an hour. When I woke, the sun had moved. The room was warm. I felt rested. Dinner approached. The old anxiety of the evening meal. What to cook? Would he be late? Should I keep it warm? That anxiety was gone. In its place was a quiet question. What would taste good to me tonight? I looked in the refrigerator. I saw the ingredients for the pasta he liked. A heavy meat sauce. Garlic bread. I closed the door. I did not want that. I wanted something clean and simple. I wanted soup. I had some fresh vegetables. I chopped an onion, a carrot, a stalk of celery. I sautéed them in a little olive oil in my favorite pot. The sound was soothing. The smell was homey, but it was my home now. I added broth and a handful of lentils. I let it simmer. I set the table again. One place. The violet plate. The cup. I lit a single candle, not for romance but for the softness of its light. I poured myself a glass of cold water with a slice of lemon. I sat down to my soup. I ate it slowly. It was good. It was exactly what I wanted. The luxury of that, the alignment of desire and action, felt like a miracle. After I washed the single bowl and pot, one did not turn on the television. The noise of other people's stories felt like an invasion. I went back to my chair in the sunroom. It was dark now, but the street lamp outside cast a soft glow. I sat in the dimness. I did not think of him. I did not think of her. I thought of very little. I just breathed. I listened to the house. Its creaks and sighs were familiar. They were the sounds of a companion I had neglected. The house itself. I went to bed early. The ritual was entirely my own. I washed my face. I brushed my hair. I put on a nightgown I liked, not the practical one but the one with the lace at the neck. It felt like a gift to myself. I slipped into bed. The emptiness on the other side was a vast space. But as I lay there in the dark, I did not feel the emptiness as loneliness. I felt it as territory. Room to stretch. Room to turn. Room to breathe without consideration for another's sleep. The luxury of a single plate was not about being alone. It was about being in charge. It was the profound uncluttering of my own desires from the constant static of his. For so long my wants had been a whispered conversation in a noisy room. I had to strain to hear them. Now the room was quiet. My own voice was clear. It was the smallest of revolutions. A peach. A cup of jasmine tea. A chair in the sun. A nap. But in those small acts I was not just living alone. I was beginning the long, slow process of courting myself. Of asking myself what I liked and then unapologetically providing it. It was not selfishness. It was the most basic kind of respect. The kind I had lavished on him for 32 years. It was finally my turn to receive it. And the giver and the receiver were both me. That was the first day. There would be harder days. Days when the silence would feel heavy. Days when the empty space would ache. But I had discovered the first tool for survival. The question, what do I want? And the even more important act, listening for the answer. And then the bravest thing of all, honoring it, with a single plate, with a fragile cup, with a patch of sunlight that belonged to no one but me. The silence was my fortress. I built it brick by brick in the days that followed. I built it with unreturned phone calls. I built it with brief polite answers. I built it by refusing to furnish the empty rooms of his guilt with my anger. He did not understand fortresses. He expected a battlefield, and a man who arrives for a war to find only a still and impregnable wall does not know what to do with his weapons. His confusion was my quiet victory. He called on the third day. I saw his name on the caller ID. The stone in my chest pulsed once, a cold dull ache. I let it ring 4 times. I breathed in. I breathed out. I picked up the phone. Hello, David. My voice was pleasant, neutral, the voice of a receptionist at a doctor's office. It held no history. Helen, how are you holding up? His tone was careful, softer than it had been in the kitchen. It was the voice of a man testing the temperature of a bath. I'm fine, thank you. How are you? I asked, not because I cared but because it was the script of polite society. I would follow that script to the letter. It was a shield, a pause. He wasn't fine. I could hear the strain in his breathing. It's been a rough couple days. Look, Helen, we need to talk. Really talk. About the house. The accounts. Everything. This silence isn't helping. I was standing in my sunroom. The light was on the violets of my teacup. I told you this weekend, David. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. It's cleaner that way, but there are things we need to decide together. A hint of frustration seeped into his voice. The old paternal tone, the one that said, let me handle this. We have 32 years of shared life. You can't just delegate that to lawyers. I can, I said simply. And I have. It prevents misunderstandings. Another longer pause. I could hear a voice in the background. A younger female voice, sharp and questioning. Who is it? He muffled the phone, but not enough. My silence on the line was a vast empty space for his new chaos to echo in. Are you there? He asked, his voice tighter now. I'm here. Don't you have anything to say to me? Anything at all? This was what he wanted. A spark. A flare. Proof that he still mattered enough to ignite my fury. My fury would absolve him. It would make him the victim of a hysterical woman. It would justify his flight to a calmer harbor. I considered the question. Did I have anything to say? I had volumes, libraries of words, centuries of hurt, but they were mine now. Precious artifacts. I would not spend them on him. They had no currency in his new economy. What would you like me to say, David? My voice was calm as still water. I don't know. Something. You're just so cold. It's like none of this even touched you. That was his second mistake. Believing that if a wound doesn't bleed visibly, it must not be deep. The deepest cuts are clean. They don't bleed at all at first. The damage is internal, a silent severing. It has touched me, I said. And it was the truth. But my reactions are my own business. They are not a performance for you. The word performance hung in the air. It struck a nerve. He sputtered. That's not what I'm not asking for a performance. I'm asking for a human response. This is my human response. I said it quietly. Now, was there something practical you needed? I was in the middle of something. A beat of stunned silence. I was in the middle of something. The ultimate dismissal. The grand crisis of our marriage was an interruption to my daily life. I had reduced his cataclysm to the level of a telemarketer. What could you possibly be in the middle of? He asked, and the contempt was poorly disguised. It was the contempt of a man who believed he knew the borders of my world completely. Reading, I said. It was true. I was reading a poem about the flight of geese. He made a sound, a scoff, a half-laugh devoid of humor. Reading, of course. Well, I'm sorry to disturb your reading. Thank you, I said, accepting the apology he did not mean. I'll expect the lawyer's information by Friday. Goodbye, David. I hung up the phone. My hand was steady. The stone in my chest was still there, but it had edges now. It was becoming a part of my architecture. A cornerstone. He called again 2 days later. This time it was late. The hour of confessions and weak resolve. His voice was slurry, not drunk but softened by drink. The armor of his new happiness was cracking. Helen, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The words were thick. I waited. I said nothing. It's not what I thought it would be here. It's so loud. And the baby, it's not even here yet, and it's all anyone talks about. The money, the room, the stuff. It's endless. He was talking to the silence. My silence. It was a vessel he could pour anything into. I was just the keeper of the vessel. He trailed off. He couldn't say what he missed. The quiet, the order, the knowing what each day would hold. He missed the peace I had maintained. The peace he had mistaken for dullness. I'm sorry you're having a difficult time, I said. It was the most dangerous thing I had said yet. It was genuine pity. Pity is a greater distance than anger. Anger is engagement. Pity is observation from a great height. It's a mess, Helen. A god-awful mess. He was pleading now. For what? For me to agree. For me to say come home. For me to give him a bridge back to the familiar shore. Then I hope you can find a way to sort it out, I said. My voice was gentle, impossibly gentle, the gentleness of a nurse to a patient in great pain. It sounds very stressful. Don't you hate me? The question burst out of him. Raw and desperate. Just say it. Say you hate me. It would be easier. And there it was. The core of his bewilderment. My hatred was a necessary ingredient in his new life story. The villain requires the victim's curse to feel heroic in his rebellion. I was denying him his narrative. No, David, I said slowly. I don't hate you. I did not say I love you. I did not say I forgive you. I simply stated the absence of one emotion. It was the truth. Hate would have been a thread still connecting us. A hot, passionate thread. What I felt was a vast, cool disconnection. Like a moon watching a distant planet. The silence on his end was profound. I had taken his easiest weapon from him. You should get some sleep, I said. Good night. The next attempt was not a call. It was an ambush. He came to the house on the day before the weekend we had agreed upon. He still had a key. I heard it in the lock. The sound was a violation. I was in the kitchen washing my single lunch plate. He walked in. He looked rumpled, older. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for evidence of my collapse. He saw the clean counters. The vase of fresh daisies on the table. My book open on the chair. He saw me calm and whole. David, the agreement was tomorrow. I did not dry my hands. I left them wet. A small signal of interrupted business. I know. I needed to see you. To talk. Face to face. This phone stuff is insane. He stood there shifting his weight. A stranger in the foyer. All right, I said. I did not invite him to sit. I did not offer coffee. I remained standing by the sink, a clear boundary between us. He faltered. Can we sit? I prefer to stand. I was just finishing up. He ran a hand through his hair. Helen, this is ridiculous. We're adults. We shared a life. Can we please just have a civil conversation about how we move forward? We are being civil, I said. And the lawyers will handle the moving forward. It's what we pay them for. Stop hiding behind the lawyers. His voice rose. Finally a crack in his control. Stop acting like this is some corporate merger. This is us. This is our life. I looked at him. I let his words hang and fade in the quiet kitchen. What would you like to discuss, David? The weather, the stock market, the infidelity, the pregnancy. Which topic will make this feel less like a corporate merger and more like the end of our marriage? He flinched as if I'd struck him. I had used the words he was avoiding. Infidelity, pregnancy. I had said them calmly like items on a list. Milk, eggs, betrayal, baby. I want to discuss you, he said, rallying. This isn't you. This ice queen. This is not the woman I married. A flash then. A quick hot spark deep inside the fortress walls. But I did not let it out. I let it burn privately. The woman you married trusted you, I said, my voice still even. She believed your vows. She built a life around your dreams. That woman, you left her. You don't get to come back now and ask where she went. You know exactly where she went. You walked away from her. For the first time I saw a shadow of real regret in his eyes. Not regret for my pain, but regret for his own miscalculation. He had not expected the quiet woman to have such a precise and deadly memory. He had expected tears, not timelines. I made a mistake, he whispered. That is between you and your conscience, I said. It is no longer my business to manage your mistakes. He stared at me, truly stared. He was searching for a crack, a fissure. He saw only a smooth, polished surface. My calm was a mirror. And in it he saw the reflection of his own chaos, his own pettiness, his own profound unrest. My peace was an accusation he could not answer. He looked away, defeated. You've already moved on, haven't you? He said it with a bitter wonder. I have moved in, I corrected softly. There's a difference. He had no reply to that. He turned and looked at the door. His shoulders slumped. The need for the fight drained out of him. He had come for a battle and found a sanctuary where his weapons were not allowed. I'll come tomorrow for the rest of my things, he said, his voice dull. I'll have them ready by the door, I said. He left. The click of the door was softer this time. He did not slam it. He closed it gently as if leaving a church. I stood at the sink. I looked at my wet hands. I dried them slowly on the towel. The puzzlement of the unfought battle. That was his burden now. He had to carry the confusion of a war that never happened. He had to live with the ghost of the confrontation he had braced for, the one that would have given him stories to tell his new love. She was so angry she threw a plate. She screamed such terrible things. Those stories become badges of honor for the leaver. Proof of the toxicity they escaped. I gave him no badges. I gave him no stories. I gave him only a quiet vacancy where his wife used to be. I gave him a civil efficient dismantling. I gave him back his own freedom in its most brutal form. I held up a door and said walk through, and when he did I closed it without a sound. His turmoil now was his own. It had no echo in me. I was no longer his sounding board. I was no longer the keeper of his guilt. His chaos had no purchase in my quiet. That was the greatest power I discovered. Not the power to hurt him back, but the power to stop absorbing his emotions. To stop being the sponge for his drama. To let his consequences be his alone. His puzzled frustration, his searching for a fight that wasn't there, his dawning realization that he was now the author of his own disorder, that was his to sit with. In the loud messy apartment with the pregnant girlfriend and the uncertain future. My silence was not a void. It was a fertile ground. And I was busy planting my own seeds there. Seeds of peace. Seeds of quiet joy. Seeds of a life that required no explanation, no defense, no battle. He was out there puzzling over the missing war. And I was in here finally at peace. The truest victory was that his confusion no longer had anything to do with me. It began with the sound of my own name. Not the name he called me, which was always Helen, but the name I called myself in the quiet of my own mind. That name had been silent for a long time. It had been buried under a mountain of other names. David's wife, Mrs. Merrill, Chloe's stepmom, the lady at the church who organizes the potlucks. The reliable one, the quiet one, the woman in the beige coat. The first time I heard it again was at the bank. I sat across from a pleasant young man in a too-stiff shirt. We were discussing the separation of accounts. He had a form in front of him. He clicked his pen. "And your full legal name for the new account, ma'am?" I opened my mouth to say Helen Merrill. That was the name I had given for 32 years. A package deal. A first name attached to a last name that was not my own by birth but by law. But the word stuck in my throat. The new account was to be mine alone. It felt wrong to christen it with a shared name. A name I would soon shed like a skin. Helen, I said. Then I paused. Just, Helen Dawson, my maiden name. It felt strange on my tongue. A forgotten flavor. A spice from a childhood cupboard. The young man nodded and wrote it down. Helen Dawson. Perfect. He said it without ceremony. Just a fact. But to me it was a seismic event. Helen Dawson. The girl who loved biology and wanted to be a veterinarian. The girl who wrote terrible poetry in a spiral notebook. The girl who laughed so hard she snorted. That girl had not died. She had been filed away under M for Merrill. And now I was pulling the file. I walked out of the bank into the flat autumn light. Helen Dawson. I said it under my breath. The Dawsons were sturdy people. Farmers from Ohio. Practical people with stubborn hearts. The Merrills were lawyers and financiers. People who spoke in subtext and appreciated good Scotch. For 32 years I had been a Dawson trying to pass as a Merrill. Now I was just a Dawson again. It felt like putting on a pair of old boots that still fit perfectly. The next encounter was with a form. The dreaded form. The one I had to fill out online. Marital status. The cursor blinked. I moved the mouse. The drop-down menu appeared. Single, married, divorced, widowed. My finger hovered. For over 3 decades I had clicked married. It was a reflex. An identity. A category that defined my taxes, my insurance, my place in the world. Now I had to choose a new country to belong to. Widowed felt like a lie. It implied an act of God, a tragedy. This was not an act of God. This was an act of David. Single felt like a regression. A return to a girlhood I could not reclaim. I clicked divorced. The word on the screen looked harsh. Final. A stamp on my passport. Divorced. It carried the echo of failure, of gossip, of pity. My hand shook. But as I stared at the letters they began to change shape. They were not a stamp of failure. They were a stamp of completion. A transaction finalized. A contract ended. Divorced. It meant I was once legally entwined and now I am legally free. It was a statement of fact, not of value. The shaking stopped. I took a breath. I clicked submit. That was the second time I said my name. Not aloud, but in the digital ether. Helen Dawson. Divorced. It was my new signature. The real work began in the empty house. I would walk from room to room and I would speak aloud. Not to anyone, just to the air, to the listening walls. Helen likes the curtains open in the morning. Helen prefers the thermostat at 68 degrees at night. Helen thinks this wallpaper is too busy. Helen is tired of that ugly lamp. At first it felt foolish, theatrical, talking to myself, but it wasn't for me. It was for her, for the Helen who had been mute for so long. I was reintroducing her to her own domain. I was pointing out the features of her kingdom. Then I began to ask her questions. What does Helen want for dinner? She wants soup again. The lentil soup. She is in charge of her own digestion now. She can have soup 3 nights a week if she wants. What does Helen want to watch? Nothing. She wants to sit in the quiet. The quiet is a bomb. What does Helen want to do this weekend? She wants to drive to the coast. Just to see the water. To feel small against the vast gray horizon. I became my own best friend. My own attentive parent. My own curious suitor. I courted myself with small kindnesses. I bought the expensive honey from the farmer's market just because I liked the taste. I left a project half finished on the table because I felt like reading instead. I took a long bath in the middle of the afternoon with the door unlocked because there was no one to walk in. The boundaries of my life became the boundaries of my own desires. They were no longer negotiated territories. The world outside began to reflect the change. I introduced myself to new people. The instructor at the community college French class. Bonjour, je m'appelle Helen. I did not say Meryl. I let it hang. Just Helen. Enchantée, Helen, she said. And that was that. I was Helen, a woman taking a French class. Not a wife, not a ex-anything, a student. The label was thrilling. I met a neighbor I'd only ever waved to. She was walking a boisterous golden retriever. I'm sorry he's so excited. She laughed as the dog strained toward me. It's quite all right, I said. I'm Helen. I live in the gray house. I live, not we live. Annie, she said. Nice to finally meet you properly. Annie did not know my history. She did not see a divorcee, a betrayed wife, a woman alone. She saw a pleasant woman in a gray house. It was a liberation. I was not a story to her. I was just a person. The reclamation was not always gentle. There were moments of sheer terror. Moments when the name Helen Dawson felt like a costume that didn't fit. When the quiet of the house felt like a vacuum sucking the air from my lungs. When the freedom felt like being cast adrift in a boat with no oars. One night I stood in the middle of the living room and I screamed. I screamed my name, Helen. It was a raw guttural sound. A sound of birth and of death. It echoed off the walls and came back to me. It was the sound of a self asserting its existence. Not a wife, not a daughter, not a stepmother, a self, singular and whole. I sank to the floor afterward breathless. The echo faded. The house was silent again. But I was different. I had marked the territory with my own voice. The final act of reclamation was the most physical. I went into the guest room. The room that held the artifacts of David. The museum of our former life. I did not go in with anger. I went in with the quiet authority of a curator deaccessioning a collection. I did not throw things away. I sorted them with a detached practicality. These suits could go to a charity that outfits men for job interviews. These books could go to the library sale. These ties, these shoes, these cufflinks. I boxed them neatly. I labeled the boxes. David. For pickup. I kept only one thing. A small wooden box. Inside was not a memory of him but a memory of me. A necklace my father gave me for my high school graduation. A simple silver chain with a tiny dove. I had not worn it in 35 years. David said it was too plain. Too childish. I took it out of the box. The silver was tarnished. I polished it with a soft cloth until it shone. I fastened it around my neck. The dove lay in the hollow of my throat. It was cold at first, then it warmed to my skin. I looked in the mirror. A woman with tired eyes. Soft gray hair. A silver dove at her throat. I saw Helen Dawson. I saw the stubborn farmer's granddaughter. I saw the woman who survived. I saw myself. Not a reflection defined by another but a portrait complete in itself. The reclamation of your own name is not a moment. It is a practice. A daily ritual of choosing yourself. It is saying no to the things that numb you. It is saying yes to the small joys that spark in your chest. It is introducing yourself to the world without an appendage. It is listening for your own opinions, which are often quiet and easily drowned out. It is believing that your own company is sufficient. It is understanding that you were never just a prefix to someone else's story. You were always the main character. You just forgot how to read the book. Now when I wake up, I do not think I am alone. I think I am here. Helen is here. She has things to do. She has a peach to eat. She has a poem to read. She has a life to live. The name is no longer a whisper. It is a statement. It is the title of my story. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I am deeply interested in what happens next. The box sat by the front door for a week. I saw it every time I came down the stairs. A simple cardboard cube. Inside it rested his favorite mug. The chipped imperfect vessel made by a child's hands. It was not packed with anger. It was not packed with ceremony. It was packed with a finality so complete it was almost peaceful. I had washed it, dried it, placed it in the box alone on a bed of crumpled newspaper. It looked like an artifact being sent to a museum. Perhaps it was. He came on a Saturday as promised. The sky was the color of pewter. A soft cold rain was falling. I heard his car pull into the driveway, not with the old familiar urgency but with a slow reluctant crunch on the wet gravel. I did not go to the door. I stayed in my chair in the sunroom. I was reading, or pretending to read. My heart was a quiet drum in the cage of my chest. I heard his key in the lock. The sound was an anachronism now. A relic. He should not have that key. I made a mental note to have the locks changed. Another small administrative task of separation. He called out, "Helen." His voice echoed in the empty foyer. The house felt different to him now. I could feel his hesitation like a vibration in the air. "In here," I called back. Not welcoming, not hostile, informative. He appeared in the doorway of the sunroom. He was holding a large empty duffel bag. He looked damp from the rain. He looked at me sitting in the pool of lamplight, my book in my lap, the new Afghan I had bought for myself draped over my legs. He looked at the room, the clean windows, the single chair. He took it in. This new geography. A room he had never truly seen before, now repurposed. A room for one. "You've changed things," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. I did not elaborate. His eyes fell to the box by the front door, visible from where he stood. He walked over to it. He set down his duffel bag. He lifted the flaps of the box. He saw the mug. He went very still. For a long moment he just looked at it. Then he reached in. He picked it up. He cradled it in his palms as if checking for a heartbeat. He turned it slowly. He found the chip on the handle with his thumb. A habitual gesture. "You kept it," he said. His voice was thick with an emotion I could not quite name. Not gratitude. Something more complicated. Awe. Dread. "It was always yours," I said. My voice was clear in the quiet room. Those 5 words. It was always yours. They were the simplest, most devastating truth I had ever spoken. They were not about a mug. They were about the loyalty it represented. The daily choice to reach for that imperfect object. The 18 years of morning coffee. The quiet constant choosing of this one. I had been the keeper of that choice. The guardian of that ritual. I had filled it, washed it, placed it back on the shelf for him. My entire existence as his wife was in that gesture. The endless unacknowledged labor of caring for the details of a man's life. The emotional and physical maintenance that becomes as invisible as air. And I was giving it back. I was not throwing it at him. I was not smashing it at his feet. I was handing it to him with the calm finality of a librarian checking out a book. "This is yours. You are responsible for it now." He held the mug and he understood. The weight of it in his hands was not the weight of ceramic. It was the weight of everything he had taken for granted. The weight of my silent steadfastness. The weight of a love that was not a grand passion but a deep steady river. He had left the river for a sparkling fountain. And now he was holding the empty cup he had left behind and realizing the river had flowed on without him. He started, then stopped. He swallowed. "Sarah, she doesn't, she thinks mugs are just mugs. She broke the one from the conference in Vegas. Threw it in the sink. It wasn't even an argument really. Just carelessness." He was confessing, not to me but to the ghost in the mug. To the ghost of the woman who would never have been careless with the things he loved even when she stopped loving the man who owned them. I'm sorry, I said. And I was. I was sorry for the small sad poetry of it. The man who traded a caretaker for passion was now grieving a broken piece of promotional hotel china. It was a tragedy written in the smallest possible font. This was Chloe's, he whispered, tracing the lopsided curve of the mug. I know, I said. He looked at me, then his eyes wide and lost. Do you ever hear from her? Chloe, our stepdaughter, the artist, the free spirit who had never quite approved of him. She had sent a card when she heard. It said, I always liked you better anyway. I had not told him. We exchange emails sometimes, I said. It was the truth. She sent me pictures of her pottery. I told her I had finally planted the rose bushes we'd always talked about. He nodded, looking back at the mug. Chloe's love was in the clay. My love had been in the preserving of it. And he had walked away from both. It's just a mug, he said, but he said it to himself, a weak incantation against the truth. Yes, I agreed softly. It's just a mug. That was the final gift. My agreement. My willingness to reduce his profound loss to its literal level, to deny him the symbolism he was clutching at. I refused to be a symbol in his drama any longer. I was just a woman. It was just a mug. He was just a man picking up the last of his things in the rain. The spell broke. The moment of profound understanding passed and left only the awkward reality. He carefully placed the mug back in the box. He folded the flaps down. He picked up the box. It was so light, all that weight, and it was so light in his arms. Is that everything? He asked, nodding toward the guest room. The rest is in there. In boxes, labeled. He carried the mug box to the door. He set it down and went to the guest room. I did not follow. I listened to the sounds of him moving boxes. The grunt of effort, the shuffle of feet, the front door opening and closing as he made trips to his car. The rain continued its soft patter on the roof. He came back to the sunroom doorway one last time. He was damp and disheveled. The duffel bag was slung over his shoulder. I think that's it, he said. All right, I said. I marked my page in my book and set it aside. I stood up, a hostess seeing a guest to the door. We walked to the foyer. The house felt emptier somehow. Not of his things, but of his potential to return. This was the final cord being cut. He stood with his hand on the doorknob. He looked old. I saw every one of his 62 years in the slump of his shoulders, in the lines around his eyes. The new life was aging him faster than the old one ever had. Hell and he searched for words. An apology, a blessing, a curse. He found none. I wish you well, he said finally. It was what people said. I wish you well too, David, I said. And I meant it. I wished him a well deep enough to hold his regret. I wished him the clarity to understand what he had done. I wished him no ill will at all. That was the greatest distance I had traveled. From love to indifference is a marathon. From indifference to genuine well-wishing is a pilgrimage. He opened the door. The damp cold air rushed in. He picked up the box with the mug. He stepped out into the gray afternoon. I closed the door behind him. I turned the lock. A soft solid click. I walked back to my sunroom. I sat in my chair. I picked up my book. But I did not read. I listened. I listened to the sound of his car engine starting. The sound of the tires on the wet gravel. The sound fading until it was swallowed by the rain and the distance. The final gift of the mug was not what I gave to him. It was what I gave to myself. I had made him carry his own sentiment. I had made him the custodian of his own nostalgia. I had taken the weight of his emotional artifacts off my shelves and placed them firmly in his hands. My revenge, a word too hot and active for what it was simply this: I let him go. Completely. I did not hold on to him with my hatred or my love or my memories. I packed his favorite mug. I handed it to him. And in doing so I handed him back the entire emotional landscape of our life together. The good memories and the bad were his to curate now. They were no longer my burden to carry, my museum to maintain. The house was quiet, only the sound of the rain. I looked at my hands. They were empty. They were free. They were mine. The dove at my throat felt warm against my skin. I touched it. A small silver truth. He was gone. And I was here, Helen Dawson, in a quiet house, in a chair by the window, with a whole life waiting in the pages of a book and in the fall of the rain and in the empty space where a box used to be by the door. The gift was given. The chapter was closed. The mug was just a mug. And I was finally just myself. So, my dears, that's how it ended. Not with a bang, as the poet says. Not with tears or lawyers' letters or scenes in a restaurant. It ended with the quiet click of a lock. With a box in the rain. With the weight of a ceramic mug passing from my keeping to his. This story, if it is to have a moral, and I'm not sure our lives are here for morals, but for living, it would be this: your dignity is not a thing someone can take from you. It is a thing you can only ever surrender. And you surrender it not in the big moments of betrayal, but in the small, daily moments afterward. You surrender it when you beg for an explanation that will never satisfy. You surrender it when you rage for an audience that has left the theater. You surrender it when you shrink your world to the size of his mistake. I chose not to surrender mine. I chose, instead, to fold it around me like a cloak. I chose silence over shouting, space over clinging, self-reclamation over revenge, and in that choice, I found a power I never knew I had. The power of a closed door. The power of a single plate. The power of my own name, spoken softly in an empty room. He has his life now. The one he chose. I have mine. The one I discovered was here all along, waiting for me in the quiet. If you are sitting in a kitchen that has gone quiet, if you are holding the pieces of a promise that has broken, hear an old woman's whisper, you are not being emptied. You are being cleared. Cleared for new growth. For different light. The most profound journey you will ever take is the 18 inches from your head to your heart, to finally listen to what you want. To finally court your own soul. It is not an easy path. But it is a true one. And you, my dear, you are equal to it. Now, go on. Be gentle with yourselves. And remember, the cup you are meant to drink from. It has your name on it. No one else's.